everyone, I'm Kristen Ciccolini.
And I'm Janine Malone.
And you're listening to It's Just a Phase. Each week we'll bring you inspiring and informative conversations about honoring the different cycles of life, covering topics of health and wellness, moon phases, astrology, witchcraft, feminism, and more, so you can superpower your well-being and live your best life.
Hello. Hi.
Mercury retrograde got us.
Take two.
Well, we are recording this a little before the election, so still in Mercury retrograde, and we just lost the first half of our recording. So
all that brilliance and hilarity, you guys will it's been lost to the ether.
Well, I enjoyed it. We talked a little bit about how I did something crazy and deleted Twitter from my phone, which is like huge for me because I live on Twitter. It is, when people ask me where I live, I say Boston and Twitter.
Boston, and also a website called twitter.com.
Yes.
So how does it feel to be homeless?
Like I have a phantom limb.
Yeah. Oh my God. I know, it's wild. Like, it's crazy. We were talking like how many times you still go back to like where that little like icon was on your phone. Like,
yeah.
But
and it's only been a couple days, but it makes me pause. And every time I like go to just like automatically open Twitter on my phone and I realize it's not there, I'm like, oh, okay, I should be doing something else right now.
Yeah, totally. It is like an interesting little check-in point. Like, maybe I should drink some water or something.
Yeah.
Replace it with some other habits. Like,
what do I need instead? Am I just bored?
Yeah.
I should take a walk. One thing we should tell you is that we are recording this before the election. So if you are noticing that we're not talking about it, it's because we don't know what's happening. We have no idea what's happening in the future.
We do not. So, hoping that this note finds you well.
I hope this note finds you not screaming into a pillow.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's just wild. Obviously, we're only a couple days before actual election day. Obviously, many, many people have been voting up until this point. And yeah. So we're excited for the episode today for a lot of reasons. But first, taking a cue from Kristen, we're really in a waning moon week. We're releasing this week. We're taking care of ourselves. So you can start to be thinking about, and again, it's like funny to think about the outcomes that we could all be experiencing when you're listening to this when it comes out. But this is really the time to be thinking about how you're refilling your cup, what rest looks like. I think we've been in a bit of a marathon, to say the least.
Totally.
So like taking a little bit of spaciousness, noticing where you're feeling tight or cagey, easily frustrated, moody, any of those things. Maybe that's just me. But yeah, that's where you can start paying attention and trying to bring a little bit of tenderness to like that area of life and really taking care of the places where you're feeling a little bit reactive.
Yeah, and boundaries are particularly important at this time. We talk about boundaries all the time, but we do that because they need to be kept up with. So wouldn't it be great if we could just set a boundary and that was that? Like lock a door and that's it. But that's not how it works. We need to constantly tend to them and keep them up and make sure that, that's what we're doing. And so it's important to talk about in waning moon weeks, as we've talked about many times before. And Sarah Gottesdiener, she did a great episode on her new podcast, Moonbeaming, all about protection magic. And that would be a great lesson this week for the waning moon, dark moon too. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually want to re-listen to it. I thought that was really helpful. And like you said, it's never a bad time to learn about boundaries because we're always working on them. So it's my forever work, definitely. We also have new moon in Scorpio on Saturday, the 14th. And I think that this kind of combination of new moon, really intentional energy mixed with Scorpio is super interesting because you can really start to think about like where you want to be going, where you're heading, but also what you're not interested in taking with you. Like what can't come on that journey. So, how you're kind of like lightening the load physically, mentally, energetically feels like a really good time to just do some of that assessment, setting intentions around healing, ending patterns, releasing habits that just aren't serving you anymore. I really like to think about like kind of the imagery of if you're climbing a mountain, you like start with all these supplies. And throughout the journey, you're like obviously, using some of them, aka like eating food, etc. But also, as you ascend and the oxygen gets a little bit thinner, you can't carry as much with you. So starting to think about like what are the things that helped you get to this point but don't need to come the rest of the way, and doing some of that releasing work as you set new intentions, to move onwards and upwards.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about social media and how,
Sure.
like, for anything that feels scary to release, just, I mean, just think about like it can always come back. You can always bring it back if you find that releasing it either isn't working for you or it just, you aren't ready 100% yet. Anything you release can always be, you could always download the Twitter app again.
If it comes back, it's yours. That's how you know.
Yeah.
To quote Christina Aguilera.
Yeah. What is she doing lately?
Yeah. How is she? Is she on The Voice, or she was on The Voice and now it's Gwen Stefani and they're like basically the same person. So
I think so. Yes. And Gwen Stefani just got engaged. I saw that news this week. I'm pretty sure I thought she was already engaged. Didn't we already think that?
I thought that as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
congrats to longtime listener Gwen Stefani.
Huge fan of It's
On
Just
her,
Space.
yeah,
She and Blake listen to us
all the
every week.
time. That's how they plan their lives.
Anyway, so we or we forgot to do the November numerology last week. We were just so
Oh,
excited about tarot. Is that what we
we
did last
were.
week?
Yeah, I
We were
know.
so excited about tarot that we forgot to get into this. But it is a 6 month in November, and six is a number of compassion, unconditional love, self care. So it's really funny that when we see three sixes in a row, we freak out, Satan. And I tried to figure out the origin of 666 being, the number of the beast, aside from it's a really great Iron Maiden song. But everything I found was basically just like, well, it says it in the Bible.
Sick.
It's like, okay, well then how did they get it? I didn't find
Yeah.
any actual connection as to why, 666 is the
Hmm.
devil's number. But especially because six is supposed to be a very nurturing and supportive number. So sixes in the tarot are expansive and sweet. They can be heart openers, vulnerability teachers, and some ways we can work with this number since it's a number of compassion, speaking up for those who don't have a voice. So, whatever happens with this election, remember we're recording a few days in advance, work with that unconditional love and that compassion and stand up for what's right. And to do that, you can revisit our cyclical activism episode for ideas on how you can get involved.
Mhm.
And on the other side of the spectrum, since it's more of an emotional time, if you are out of alignment this month, which a lot of us probably are, we can be more susceptible to feeling frustrated, not knowing what to do with all of our feelings. And, sometimes that can be channeled into gossip and saying things you don't mean or being overly nitpicky because, you're searching for some semblance of control out there. Um, so our recommendation, go to therapy, dude. We love
Yes.
it. Therapy's
Love
great.
therapy.
Yes. And that's
Talk about frontline workers.
seriously. I know. I was
Like,
actually thinking because I find it, I mean, I don't know about you, but like being a service provider, like at this time and having to hold space for other people when everyone is
mhm.
feeling like chaotic, I can
Yeah,
only imagine. So, I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, both of us deal with it, but I can only imagine for therapists who are like all day holding
Yeah.
space for other people. Bless you.
Yeah. I know. I would be curious if any of you are therapists or in like the mental health field, like will you just like email us and let us know what you do for like energetic hygiene? Like,
Yeah, and also if you're okay, like if you need
yeah,
someone to talk to.
exactly. We're
Yeah,
not professionals, but
no. But we can
yeah.
send you memes.
Yes, we're good at that. Good at a good at sending like a pointed reductress article headline.
I was just gonna say that. Janine and I send each other reductress articles all the time.
That's how we cope.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today, Janine?
I'm so excited. Today we are talking about anti-capitalist practices for everyday life.
Woohoo! It's a doozy.
Yes, it's a doozy. As we mentioned many times, but we're going to keep doing it. We recorded this episode before Election Day, but we figured no matter what the outcome, it is never a bad time to talk about breaking up with capitalism. So, first, what is capitalism? By definition, I feel like there should be like fancy music playing in the background as I read this definition.
Webster's definition or Webster's
Yeah.
dictionary says.
By definition, it's an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Which the Vote did an awesome episode called Capitalism 101 a few months ago. We'll link to that in the show notes if you want to like learn more literally about the system and, critiques of it and all that kind of stuff. Erica
It's
and
a
Paige
really
are
great
amazing.
episode.
It's
Yeah.
so good. Um and so that could be a great partner to this episode if if you have any questions. But where we really hope to focus today is on practices that you can use to combat capitalism in life, business, and spirituality. So essentially, capitalism rewards individuals and companies who make a lot of money by any means necessary. So, like hoarding wealth. This is where some of the major critiques of capitalism include like that the system gives rise to mass income inequality, exploitation of workers in the environment for financial gain, colonialism, imperialism, slavery, etc. Like we'll talk briefly in all of these points of like how that links, but again, that which the vote episode is really great if you have questions on like the system overall.
And when we said it rewards individuals who make a lot of money, it's important to note that just because you make money, that does not mean that you're a capitalist. It is not shameful to make money at all. This is so, so important to remember. Money is not inherently evil. However, it's that second thing that Janine said, by any means necessary. That hoarding of wealth in the context of toxic late stage capitalism, that's the evil stuff that we're talking about. And the overlord is Jeff
Yeah,
Bezos.
suck it, Bezos.
All in all, we want to remind you that you should not carry more shame than a billionaire does because none of them have shame about hoarding wealth while people are starving and on the streets. Otherwise, they would not be billionaires. So you should not feel any shame at all. And
Mm-hmm.
while capitalism is a much bigger system than any of us individually can overthrow or transform, we can individually work to dismantle our personal reliance on it, our relationship to it, and start to detangle our actions from the harmful effects of unchecked capitalism. And that's what we hope to discuss today.
Yes. So let's start with business because I feel like this is a big one. If you own your own business, if you work for, any size business actually, is like understanding the difference between what a business is and, like Kristen was just saying, being a capitalist, particularly one that's like toxic in, um, exploiting different areas of humanity and the earth. So business success does not mean immediately that you are a toxic capitalist. Put very simply, business means that you do work, you get paid for that work, and you spend earnings on what you need or want. Capitalism looks like you outsource much of the work, underpay or exploit your workers, and then take or accumulate the profit for your own benefit. So we can kind of easily see the difference there, right? Like the difference between having a small business, having a small team, everyone's working together, and you kind of like put very simply, like you do a task, you get paid for the task, you split, you either take the profits if you're a solopreneur or you split, with your team. You're paying everyone fairly. But companies that are huge like Amazon or where Jeff Bezos is making an obscene amount of money, and you have reports of their warehouse workers like not being allowed bathroom breaks. That's you can see the difference there, right? I think it's really clear. But again, like we could get into a lot of nuance there, but I think that's important to talk about before we get into the business practices.
Yeah, and when it comes to making money, if you do still kind of feel that guilt, so I listened to the So You Want to Be a Witch podcast, and she
Yeah.
recently had Anna Joy from the Queer Witch podcast. Can you tell we listen to a lot of podcasts?
We
um,
love podcasts.
yeah, well, Anna, it was about, anti-capitalist practices and like
Mm-hmm.
and being an anti-capitalist witch. And she was talking about, or Anna was talking about how she said you are a victim of billionaires' crimes. You getting money is actually justice. There's nothing to feel guilty about. It's justice because when you have that money, you're going to make sure that you're not creating oppressive systems. If this is important to you, that's what you're going to do with that money. You getting money and having that power, because money is power, is good for the world, and you're not helping anybody by not getting paid. So making money can be justice. It can be used for good rather than, making you feel guilty for having any at all.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And it's like, again, you it's like feeling guilty about getting table scraps, put plainly.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's just such a huge accumulation. And I know that the conversation around capitalism gets really complicated. And for me, I mean, case in point, if Erica from House Witch is listening, like I we've had really interesting conversations because I'm like, I don't know, am I a capitalist? And she was like the first person to be like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, no. You know what I mean? But like it is so wrapped up in like money, capital, like the whole system. So I mean, I just want to share that because it's like it's even confusing for me, and
Yeah,
I
but
try to actively practice that.
you also actively give back, and you
Right.
use your money for good, whereas it's not something that you should feel guilty for, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like, I feel the same way about, this whole thing. I want to make enough to be comfortable, and I also want to make enough to be able to support others.
Yes.
And that's a whole lot of difference than I want to make all
Hmm.
the fucking money and I don't want to give it to anyone else and I just want it to be for me, and.
Right. I mean, case in point, all those like memes and stuff that go around that are like, okay, this is like another day that Jeff Bezos has decided not to end world hunger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you have that kind of money. When people talk about like fuck you money, like he
Yeah.
has end poverty for the entire world money.
Yeah.
And like is still like, nah, like I don't even know what he does. Honestly, whatever. Again, longtime listener Jeff Bezos, fuck you. Um but let's talk about practices. So there's a handful we want to go through. First of all, as you can tell, paying your workers a fair living wage. That's a huge, very integral practice to being anti capitalist in your business. One of the most prevalent systems of capitalism is that the workers, who are the means of production, are making pennies while quote unquote owners or founders or whatever are raking in the big bucks. So you can think about those huge corporate bonuses you hear about on the news, CEOs making like 50 times what their employees make, the fact that our nationwide minimum wage hasn't been raised in 11 years. And one of the main arguments is that it would, quote, be bad for business. I'm sorry. If your business can't survive because you aren't paying people a living wage, your business is unsustainable. Like, I cannot tell you how much I hate that argument
Yeah.
more.
It's like the same thing as like if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out to eat. If you can't
Yes.
afford to support your employees, You can't afford to have employees.
Correct. So if you are in a position to of needing to bring on new staff, or even, being involved in the hiring process at your company, wage transparency, advocating for living wages is super important. And there's a lot of ways you can go about doing that. You can, do market research, you can do research for your area. I just I mean, I think that like having honest and open conversations about money through even just the interview process is so important. How many times have you seen like a job posting that doesn't have anything about the compensation package, as if you're just
Hate
like
that.
applying for a job for fucking fun? Like, doy, I want to get,
Yeah, and
I
if
need
you
to get
ask
paid.
about it, if you ask about it at the interview, it's like frowned upon too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's wild. So the more we can be talking about it, and the more that same thing, we can be doing research, we can be talking to our friends and family, the way that we can have those conversations like in our businesses, or really just thinking about like we I think, especially again, this is speaking as a small business owner, I know that no one in the Boston area who is making minimum wage is being paid a fair living wage. So like
Hmm.
that's not what I would ever offer anyone. And so there's a hint of compassion in there. There's obviously a lot of ways you can look into what works for you and not. But that to me is like number one on anti-capitalist business practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, graduating in 2009 in the middle of a recession, I have had more than my fair share of experiences of being exploited by my employers. I think I can't remember if I told this story in the Q&A episode about me, but about like my first job after college. I was exploited big time. I worked for what was basically like a content farm.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, the sales team made all the money, like over promising these impossible output numbers, leaving the writers to like kill themselves under delivering. And like sales team was living it up. I had to write over 400 articles a month. I stayed late every single day. I made $28,000. And I saw someone one time on Twitter say like there was like something about salaries going around, like what was the salary of your first job? And someone was like, my salary was 28,000 in 1970 something. And I was like, great. Mine was that in 2009.
Wow. Yeah.
And also more recently, so what you meant when you were talking about living wages, more recently I partnered with a company who literally told me when I wouldn't accept their rate, like they gave me a contract with everything and I was like, this isn't going to work. They told me
Mhm.
it wasn't meant to be a living wage, to encourage me to seek out more clients. And I was like,
Oh,
sounds like you're saying the quiet part out loud. Like, you know, you're not supposed
yeah.
to say that. But also, like, I literally would rather be poor and do everything myself than have to work for assholes like that, which
Yeah,
is, I guess,
absolutely.
I suppose, a somewhat privileged statement. But it's like, it's rampant, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, I feel very lucky that I've really always worked for such small companies. Like I haven't really had that experience necessarily. I mean, I'm sure if I looked back at some of the jobs I had like right after college or during college or whatever, but like I mean, I think that's part of what has made me such a small business cheerleader, because I'm like, "Oh, you actually understand like I don't know, I've been lucky enough to always have this like transparency into like what the owners are making, who's
Mm,
like, being part of the hiring process, talking about like when we're hiring retail teams, what I think is fair, and being involved in those conversations has really felt like such a privilege.
that's
Is a
good.
privilege.
Because
Yeah.
there is, I mean, there is obviously the opportunity to be exploited in small companies too, and I've definitely experienced that
Yes.
as well, where it's like kind of like that what we've talked about with like the hashtag girl boss companies that still hold up patriarchal standards within their
Absolutely.
companies, but have like a feminist facade.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, when I say small, I mean like literally less than 10 employees. So it's like you just can't. I mean, not to say that you can't, but it's very hard when I'm like, the one doing our finances to be like, "Hey,
True.
what the fuck? How are you paying yourself 5 times more than me?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, what a privilege, but also it's, it's very easy to see, and it's also very easy to see who falls victim to that,
Yeah.
especially again when you see companies not only who are just like profiting so significantly, but are getting like truly government bailouts. And then their CEOs are still getting multi-million dollar, tens of millions of dollars in bonuses. Like, yo, I can't. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's number one. What else can we do to make our businesses anti-capitalist, Kristen?
We can prioritize accessibility. So, not everyone's services or products are going to be accessible to every single person, but there if there are things you can do, try doing it. Can you offer scholarships if you do services or if you teach classes or things like that? Can you offer discounts? Can you offer a sliding scale to make your work or your products more affordable?
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I've kind of struggled with a little bit because I just it's hard to figure it out on your own. But I've implemented a sliding scale for my coaching, and I also have a lot of different offerings. So the sync program that was intended to be a more accessible way of working with me. Plus, I also write a lot of free content on my blog and on
Mm-hmm.
my Instagram. So that's the way I try to incorporate accessibility into my work. How do you how do you tend to do that with yours?
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly. Like, and again, this is, I think, somewhere that can get tricky for very small businesses because, like, we want to offer accessibility, but a lot of times, like, especially for service providers, it's like one to one, And so it's
Yeah.
like there's not there's not a ton of wiggle room all the time. But that being said, yes, free content 1000%, like having resources that are available to people no matter what, and kind of at like particularly for me when I work with businesses, like I try to think about like the first few things, like to get up and running, to get like those, get to a certain benchmark to be able to, be at a point where you're really ready to invest in like consulting or coaching or whatever. But I want like every small business to succeed. So, trying to make that available. I do a lot of like free consultations, workshops, things like that. I do a lot of stuff in trade as well, to be honest, probably more than I should. I shouldn't even really advertise that.
I've done
But
that.
yeah, like, and again, it totally depends on the situation, but I'm also really working on new, more accessible kind of like community offerings, courses, community things like that, because yeah, one-on-one is expensive because it's limited, right? Like I only have so many hours in the day, as do you, and so to have dedicated time is always going to be kind of the most expensive thing that I offer. And even then, talk about pricing another day. But I also feel like this is just such a huge part of like the work that I'm doing with clients is figuring out like ways to make their businesses accessible as well. So like for it totally depends on the type of business, the kind of business, but I think that there's a lot of cool and interesting creative solutions if you're offering like discounts to certain events, or you like do partnerships, or there's like a give back program, or there's like sponsor. I don't know. There's so many cool ways, or even just thinking about, again, the price points. I work with, as we know, a lot of retailers. So, like, thinking about the price points that you have available and making that just as accessible to the people that you're trying to serve as you can. And really, a lot like alignment is important to me there, like if you, I think that I was reading something recently that was like a small business statistic that was like, I can't remember the exact number, so don't quote me, but like 52% of small businesses that fail, it's because it's not a market fit. And I'm like, well, that seems fucking broad as hell. And what are the other 48%? But like, it's fascinating to think about that. Like, if you're trying to serve a certain kind of person, like I serve small businesses, you can mark my words, I'm never going to have a $25,000 like mastermind. Like, that's just not the person that I'm serving. The businesses that I help do not have 25K in the bank to have like a retreat, you know?
Mhm.
So just I think thinking about that too, just kind of like not necessarily product market fit, but just who you're really looking to serve, why you're looking to serve them, and the forms that that can take. I think that the question of accessibility doesn't have to be limiting. It can actually be somewhere you can get really creative. Obviously, Michelle at Holisticism has done a lot of amazing interviews and work about her sliding scale. Um, there's a lot more examples, but I think that that's kind of how it shows up for me, I guess.
Yeah, and also I think accessibility can be, outside of pricing. It can also
Totally.
be to serve people with disabilities too.
Yes. Yes,
So
you're
that's
so
something
right.
that is often left out of the conversation when we're talking about accessibility. Do you have accessible design? If you do online courses, do you have closed captions? Are the colors that you use good for people with, visible, or what's the word? Vision disabilities, not visible. For things like that, are you using alt text? Are you filling out the meta descriptions? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you might not be very tech savvy, but I suggest you look it up.
Yes.
But yeah, that's another way to offer some form of accessibility with your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. It's a huge point. I also think that you can be looking to your vendors and business partners to ensure that your values are aligned. Research board of directors, their practices, their beliefs, where, they're donating their money. This can be really hard and tedious work, but like there's a classic example, which is Uline. It's a big like shipping and supply provider, boxes, packaging, that kind of stuff. And in 2018, there was this New York Times piece about the founders and how they're major, major supporters of conservative right wing agendas that are like very discriminatory. And
Ooh.
so, yeah. And a lot of small, like many, many, many small businesses use Uline for packaging and packing supplies. And it's not super easy to find alternatives. And I understand being, you're bogged down. You have a lot to do. So, but just as we say that consumers vote with our dollars, like businesses do as well. So, that's just an example. And if any of you are freaking out right now, I will link an article with some alternatives in the show notes in case anyone's like, shit, I use Uline, and I'll link that New York Times article too. But it's really interesting to think about those kind of things. Same thing, where you're keeping your money, what banks you're using, um, just things like that. If you can stay local, if you can kind of like build those personal relationships with like your printer, your, who's like doing the shipping for you, all that kind of stuff is really important to make sure you have alignment so that your kind of like sphere of influence, if you will, is as aligned as possible.
These show notes are going to be so juicy with all the
Yeah, they are.
resources. I'm kind of excited for
Me too.
it. Another thing you can do is look into profit sharing or bonus structures, community exit strategies. Shout out to Market Basket.
We love it.
What's their tagline? Do they have one?
Mm, I don't know.
I don't know. I was going to say, don't you just love a bargain? But that's the Christmas tree show.
Another New England
Anyway,
fave.
Anyway, we love Market Basket. They do profit sharing, and like everyone I know worked at Market Basket in high school, and they all have houses now. So it's
That's a
really
fun fact.
beneficial. Yeah, it's really beneficial for your employees.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a few years ago when they were protesting because there was like they were trying to oust like the president or the CEO
Yeah.
or something, and people loved him. Like he was
Hmm.
so good to the employees, and I'm like, wow, when was the last time you saw
Yeah.
you saw a protest to like keep someone in power at an
Seriously,
organization?
people
So
love the MB around here.
yes. Oh my God, I miss living
Oh
when
wait,
we lived
no,
in
I know what I was thinking. My
what?
grandmother called it Demolas because that was
Oh, the old name?
that was the family's name that owned it.
Oh
And
my
she'd
God,
always be like,
yes.
I gotta go down to Demolas.
Oh my God, so fucking cute. I mean, we used to live in Union Square in Somerville, like right next to like 2 blocks away from that Market Basket, and it was always such a shit show
Oh
because
my
it's
God,
like
that one is horrible. Well, just the amount of, it's
it
just the sheer amount of people that go there.
right. Like I love it. I actually miss it so much because it's like so cheap, but oh my God, like the chaos, do not miss. Um, Anyways, and lastly, I mean, I think that this is just an interesting question to meditate on as you're setting goals for your business is like, ask yourself what is enough. Like, set goals based on needs, the aligned growth that you want. Like, and I'm not saying that you can't want to be a big company. You absolutely can want that, and it can be very aligned for you. But I see a lot of people who are setting goals for their businesses, and they're like, next year I want to make $500,000. And I'm like, okay, what would that mean for you? Why do you want to do that? Here's what would go into that. You know, like I think that we have this kind of idea that like more money is always good. But I think that it's important to think about like, yeah, how you're like kind of like you were saying at the beginning, like if you have more money and you know you can do good with it and you have a plan to do that, amazing. Like let's get you there. But I think that like accumulation of wealth just because of like some ego trip uh ain't cute. Let's just leave it at that.
It's the American dream, Janine.
Yeah. Oh my god. Mo money, mo problems. You know what I mean?
So moving on, if you're not a business owner, sorry, we just spent all the time on that. But there's plenty of things that you can do in your personal life, in your spirituality. So we'll talk about that now. So in your personal life, creating create meaning in your life that has nothing to do with consumption. So just sit with that for a second and just think about what that even means because we are always consuming something, even if it's social media, if it's, just reading stuff all the time, podcasts and watching TV, we're always, always consuming. So try to make space for pleasure in a way that has nothing to do with that. Like get out and enjoy nature, maybe sit and do some arts and crafts, engage in a ritual, whether that's actually, crafting a spell or just making yourself some tea in the morning, whatever it is, find some time in your day to not consume because we are doing so much consuming throughout the rest of the day. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. I'm full.
Yeah.
um yeah, and I think that like pairing that with like rest, that's like when you hear the saying like rest is radical, like that this is why resting, allowing your body, your brain, your spirit to renew without needing feeling the need to be productive, um, is major. And if it's hard for you to do that, capitalism is why.
100%. So we tend to fear rest in our culture, and it's because, we're afraid of getting behind on work. We're afraid of missing out on fun with friends. We're afraid of how it'll be seen by our coworkers because, our society values productivity among all else. So, rest, we've said this before, it's one of the most productive things you can do. It helps you feel better, it helps you react to things better, be more attentive, be more present. Also, from a nutrition perspective, it helps you absorb nutrients better too, because when you're stressed, that locks up your digestion and you're really not processing things the way that you should be. So
Mm,
you get more out of your food when you rest as well.
my God, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely important to see all sides of that argument. um,
Who doesn't need a nap?
I mean, I need a nap right now.
I'm not a big
Uh,
napper, but I do like to
Me
go to bed
neither, but I
somewhat
do like
early.
to just like lay down.
Yeah. I like to relax, just like, yeah,
Yeah,
rest.
yeah, totally. Um, you can also create opportunities to exchange goods, services, food, offerings in your community, like outside of the idea of exchanging money. So, like, I think that that can get really fun and really creative, even if it's just like within your group of friends, or, if you're getting rid of things and like offering them or doing some kind of trade. I think that that, again, can be really interesting and can create these kind of different bonds to what that means to like exchange.
Yeah, I just thought of when you were saying that with friends. I just thought of back in the day, like back in college, there was this group, or they called themselves the Swapaholics. Do you remember this?
Yes.
I used
Oh
to
my
go to
God.
all
Yeah.
their events. They used to have these big events where I don't know, I don't know if people would donate or I don't know where they got their clothes from, but they would just put everything in a room and it was like that like the David's Bridal, like mad dash when they open the doors and like everyone goes crazy and tries to grab everything.
Yeah.
But that was always fun to just find something new and you didn't have to spend money on anything. It's just like, I don't know, thrifting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, thrifting, even though obviously there's a money exchange there too, like it's really good for the environment to like buy vintage, to thrift, to
Yeah,
like,
and to swap with your friends.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And there was a lot of this going on in the beginning of the pandemic, thinking about, what your currency is that isn't money. And I know in my neighborhood, there was a spreadsheet going around with what people could offer outside of finances. So it was basically just like a spreadsheet of skills that people had to offer. So cooking, baking, sewing. Some people even offered therapy, which, I should have taken up back then. But I thought that was such an awesome way for people to help each other out without needing to spend anything. And then
Yeah.
there's also the buy nothing groups that are in pretty much, I don't know, at least every neighborhood in Boston, but it's national. But there's those buy nothing groups where you just basically you post something that you're either looking for or that you want to get rid of, and rather than just throwing it in the trash, there's always someone that is willing to take whatever you're trying to get rid of. So
Yeah.
that's another way to swap things or to purge or to just get
Yeah.
things for free. Like my headphones are dying, like the wires are coming apart, and I posted the other day on my buy nothing group looking for some, and someone was like, I have some for you. And I didn't have to spend any money. It was great.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's like, I think through the pandemic, there were community fridges popping up all over. And like,
Oh
again,
yeah,
there's
there
like,
is now.
yeah, there's obviously some exchange there because it's more like a donation system. And like people, I saw a couple posts like, does anyone have the means to be able to donate kind of the electricity to like keep a refrigerator
Hmm.
running? But I think that if you're in a position to do that, those kind of things are really creative ways to serve your community. Even we've talked about before how you have like a million of those like little free libraries in your
Yeah, I love it.
area. And another big one, if you can, again, if you have means, contributing to mutual aid funds, bail funds, if you can. You can go back to episode 0 for a list of resources on those things. But again, those are more community based places to put your money rather than like sending to like some huge nonprofit. They go directly to people who need the cash.
Yeah, and building off of that, activism is another great anti-capitalist practice. So by fighting for more just, equal, and fair systems for not just you and your family, but for the greater good, that's what that's what we want to do. So not everyone is an activist, meaning you're not everyone is really getting out there on the ground and protesting and marching. That's not for everyone, and that is totally okay. But there are other ways that you can support the causes that you care about through donations, volunteering, spreading the word in your network, voting with your dollar, so choosing, who you want to support with your money, and also uplifting the activists who are out there on the ground doing the damn thing.
So important. I mean, I think speaking of voting with your dollar, like supporting small businesses as much as you can if it's in within your budget, especially as the holidays are coming up, is huge. This is more important now than ever. In September, it was reported that 60% of the closures due to COVID-19 were going to become permanent. So that's, just think about that. In a lot of states where like businesses have been closed, a significant number of businesses have been closed for a long time. So many of them will stay shuttered. And small businesses aren't just like nice to have. Like, I mean, energetically, emotionally, like it's really nice to have like a really adorable like downtown where like the people who work there know you and they can tell you the story of the makers and all those things. We love that. Like that is a huge piece of why we love small businesses, but also they have a significant impact on your community and they keep your money local. So for every dollar that you spend at a small business, 67 cents out of those 100 cents of the dollar stay in your community. So through vendor relationships, through jobs, through wages, through employee benefits. And that has a real impact on our local economy. and can be put to services that like affect people locally, you know? And so I think that there's a lot to say about convenience, you know? Like we've kind of moved into this like convenience economy. But if you have the means financially to be able to kind of like go out of your way to support a local bookstore instead of ordering a book on Amazon, it makes a huge difference. Like it feels like a small action. And yes, maybe it can be like slightly annoying because you have to like actually get in your car or whatever. Maybe you pay a little bit more. But again, if you have that privilege, it's a really powerful way to use it.
Yeah, and they appreciate it so much more. Like Jeff
Yes.
Bezos isn't going to send you a thank you card. He doesn't give a fuck.
No, he is not.
But that's a good point that you make, that small businesses aren't just cute to have,
Right.
you know?
And they are cute. Like trust
They,
like
yeah,
I
they
love
are
we
cute,
love a cute business, but like
but they are
it
like the
really
lifeblood of the local economy.
exactly. And like they add to your property value. You know, like if you live in a town that has like a bustling main street and like locally owned restaurants and like that are supporting farmers in your community and vendor like small makers, your property value goes up, your schools get better, your infrastructure, like it has a huge impact. It's not just like you have a cute main street, you live in
Yeah.
Stars Hollow, good for you, love that. Again, love it, but it has a bigger, it's more than just your feelings. I
Yeah.
guess that's what I'm saying.
Well, also, I mean, we obviously want to support as much as we can the businesses in our local area, but there are other small businesses that we want to support as well. And for that, especially if you don't have much that's local, Forage and Sustain is a really good follow on Instagram for
Mm,
learning about ethical and conscious brands. And she actually just posted a sustainable gift guide too, which is important.
awesome.
If you want to check that out, we'll put that in the show notes. But I want to say that I know caring about this stuff can often feel like it's being a little precious or pretentious. I mean, as Janine just explained, it's 100% not. But I also wanted to share something that I was reading just before we started recording, and it was about the craft chocolate industry. And it speaks to the overall theme of what we're talking about here. So it is by Alicia Kennedy. And so she says, not only was chocolate my first love, it was also my introduction to how the global food system works. Cheap or slave labor, industrial production that foregrounds quantity over quality, and an artificially low cost that allows consumers to believe that a product isn't special or worthwhile, leading as well to the cultural, political, and socioeconomic understanding of growing nations as neither special nor worthwhile by association. It's all by capitalist design, and it's also by capitalist design that by caring about ecological health, proper pay for farmers, and flavor quality, that I become a snob.
Mm,
So, like I said, this speaks to the idea that exploited labor and low costs are just so normalized that true, sustainable, ethical work by conscious brands like the ones like I just mentioned that Forage and Sustain is trying to help promote, these kinds of brands, it's seen as unworthy because we are by design separated from the people and the processes and the craft that goes into creating a product.
yes, absolutely. And like you said, it's entirely by design.
Yeah. And I understand, like all of this said, I understand if you're sitting there like, well, I don't have the budget for this. Or maybe you don't have the budget, or a disability means you need to rely on services from Amazon and from other companies that provide the services you need. If that's the case, do not feel bad. Remember what we said earlier, you are a victim of capitalism. But if you do have the capacity to choose brands, at least if you are shopping on Amazon and you have the ability to, shop around a little bit, there is the Better World Shopping Guide. That's a comprehensive resource of companies and corporations that you typically find on the shelves, and they rate them or they give them grades from A to F on whether they actually walk the walk when it comes to environmental sustainability, human rights, community involvement, animal protection, social justice. So again, if you have to buy from these places, totally fine. Don't feel guilty. But if you also have the ability to, make a more sustainable choice, there are some resources out there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note too, like if there's still ways, even in the consumption of the products that you are buying, like taking care of not just like the way we treat our clothing as like not disposable. Like if you have to
Right.
order something and you're ordering it through Amazon, like that's totally fine. There's still a million things you can do on the back end to make sure that you're like caring for it, using it as long as you can, disposing of it properly when its time comes. Like all those kind of things really do um, buoy the same ideas that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, same thing with plastic. People talk about
Yeah.
plastic straws and plastic bags, and it's like, well, I mean, I never buy straws. That's for sure. But like, if I do have a plastic straw, like I have one that I've been using for my smoothies for like years. I wash it out. Same
Yeah.
thing with plastic bags. That's something I learned from my mom and my grandmother. You wash
Oh
out your
hell
Ziploc
yeah.
bags. But yeah, there's ways like if you buy them, there are ways that you can keep them around and not have it end up in landfills or, have it be a more sustainable thing in your home.
Right, exactly. Like mending your clothes, things like that. Do
Yeah.
you know how to sew a button? Like that's honestly an important skill, Because if you have a coat and you're like, "Oh, a button fell off, so I have to get a new one." Like you don't.
Right. Exactly.
Go on YouTube. We have access to so many how-to videos.
Oh my God. I learn everything from YouTube and TikTok.
Literally, my formal education.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we do of course want to touch on spiritual practice. So, first things first, spiritual practice requires no money. Crystals,
No.
journals, meditation pillows, tinctures, all that stuff. So fun. Again, love it. But anytime you notice yourself pressing up against the belief that you need to buy something in order to connect spiritually, question that shit. Like,
Yes.
oh, I can't do a ritual this full moon because I don't have the exact crystal that this spell calls for. Or, oh, I wish I thought ahead. I like don't have, I don't have a pillow that work. Like, come on. We're smarter than that. So just notice you're noticing. Um, and it's important in that same moment to like kind of ask yourself who is profiting off of this belief that I need to buy something in order to develop my spirituality. Sure, there, like I've just mentioned, there could be recommendations for certain rituals. Like we talk about candle magic a lot, making altars, things like that. But at the very basis of all of this, all you really need is your own energy. That is the key to any ritual, any belief. And it really has to have your own energy behind it for it to work or to be put into motion. And that's really it. There's a lot of ways to get creative, and we certainly love that. But if you're someone who's like, oh, I've been waiting to do that because I need to like save money to, I really want to buy a tarot deck. And until I start reading tarot, I can't, be meditating or can't be on this journey. Like, I would humbly request that you, yeah, just start working with your breath, your own energy, spaciousness, like sit on the
You,
floor and meditate.
yeah, you are
It's,
the only tool you need.
yes, there we go. That's a nice, succinct, beautiful way of saying it, Kristen.
Well, there's a lot of money to be made in spirituality. So it used to be written off as this woo-woo thing until they realized what an opportunity there was to exploit. So
Sure.
venture capital spirituality is out there. It's all those astrology apps that are almost always backed by VCs. And every astrologer, I don't know about you, but every astrologer I know hates the ones like CoStar and Sanctuary. They're fun for memes and they're fun. They're like they make a lot of shareable content on Instagram and I don't know, it could just be it's fun. But it also kind of dumbs it down a little bit. And I'm all for making all of this stuff more accessible, but at the same time, just know that it can't replace the work of a real live human being who does this stuff for a living.
Mm,
Yeah.
definitely agree.
And we would be remiss not to bring up Sephora's Witch Kit saga. Remember that?
Oh my God. What year was that?
I, I feel like it was only last year.
Right? I know, I'm like maybe 2018, but still, it was
I
pretty
don't know.
recent.
Yeah. So if you don't know, Sephora announced a collaboration with the company Pinrose for what they called a starter witch kit that had fragrances, a tarot deck, a piece of rose quartz, and a bundle of white sage, all for $42. And again, we don't want to gatekeep anything related to witchcraft or spirituality. If people wanted to buy that, that's fine. But just the sale of it, this was not 1000% not well received. One, for capitalizing on a trend that is not really a trend, and two, the inclusion of white sage, which is super problematic for a variety of reasons. The trendiness that led to this whole saga has also led to the overharvesting of white sage, which makes it less accessible to the communities who use it in their spiritual practice. So that would be indigenous people who use it for their sacred ceremonies. And they've asked non natives to stop selling sage and smudge kits. They've also been banned from practicing their own religion in some cases. So you might see how it's an issue when white and other non-native people take something so easily for themselves that others had to fight so hard for, without giving a thought to its weight or history. So we'll put a link in the show notes to some alternatives to sage. So it's used for cleansing. But just quickly, you can use other herbs like rosemary, mugwort. You can use flowers. You can look into your own lineage to see what was used and use that. You can also cleanse with sound, like bells or your own hands. Remember, all you need is you. Your hands are free. So just an option.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on that same note, if you're going to use crystals in your practice, buying from sustainable sources, there are a ton of sellers on like Etsy, but you have to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what their ethics are. But you can always send them messages too. So we love the Village Silversmith. It's a local company with locations in Salem, Portsmouth, but they sell on Etsy and they're AGTA certified. So that's the American Gem Trade Association. And they support ethical sourcing. And that's something to just like really look into when you're shopping. Again, like anything else, like I think we forget on that same idea of like we're separated from the process. Like crystals literally come from the earth. Like they have to be mined. There's like, they're a limited resource. So even like when we consider like how many we need to buy, or like how they got to the store that we're buying them at is really really important, and those kind of questions can be not only important for you to find out in your own consumption but can also tell business owners and shop owners and things like that that their audience cares and provide more of that information, or maybe inspires them to change their behavior,
Yeah, and
which I
if
think is really
you
important.
if you reach out to them and they don't have an answer for you, find somewhere else because
Bye.
yeah, it's unlikely that they have ethical sourcing.
Correct.
Yeah. So, long story short, an hour and a half later, I don't know how long we've been recording, but if you're going to use tools for your spiritual practice, the best way is to get them from small businesses if you can and cleanse the fuck out of everything else. The last thing we want is capitalist energy in our spiritual practice.
Bye. Bye bye bye. Get out of here.
See ya.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
Like cue JoJo, get out. Hopefully, this inspired some ideas or, like, gave people some inspiration to start incorporating or thinking about things in a different way. Um, like we said, this is like truly just scratching the surface in terms of like the problems with capitalism, the practices that you can, um, start to utilize in your own life, and the kind of things you can start fighting for and noticing in our government, local and national, that you can be kind of questioning. But regardless, we want to hear what inspired you, what area of your life you're ready to totally overthrow capitalism. Like we said, hopefully by the time you're listening to this, there is some good news in the news. But if not, we can always be, either way, actually, we should always be fighting for a more fair and just and equal system. So you can tell us how you're doing that, or just like, yeah, let us know what's going on at It's Just a Phase Pod on Instagram. You can email us at it's just a phase pod at gmail.com. And if you liked what you heard today, we'd love, as always, for you to leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people like you who are interested in smashing capitalism and the patriarchy find our show. And those are the people we want here in this little thing.
Love it. Well,
We'll talk to you guys soon.
we'll see you next week.